here's a question that sounds simple, but almost nobody gets right. Which came first, fire or clothes? Take a second, actually think about it before I tell you. Most people answer instantly, fire. Obviously, fire. You need warmth before anything else, right? That's just common sense. But here's the twist that changes everything you thought you knew. Early humans lost their body hair somewhere around 1 million years ago. Genetic studies on skin pigmentation confirm it. Our ancestors went from being covered in thick fur, like every other primate, to almost completely bare-skinned and reliable, consistent clothing that didn't appear until roughly 170,000 years ago at the very earliest estimate. Do the math with me. That's an 830,000 year gap. Nearly a million years of hairless, naked humans walking across the African landscape. No fur, no clothes. How did they survive? So what exactly were our ancestors doing for almost a million years without the one thing we assume kept them alive? The answer is stranger and more fascinating than you think. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll never think about a campfire the same way again. Let's start with fire, because the evidence here is more surprising than most people realize. Scientists studying ancient cave sites in the Turkana Basin in Kenya, one of the richest fossil regions on Earth, found microscopic traces of wood ash directly linked to Homo erectus, our early ancestor, dating back roughly 1 million years. That's not a typo. 1 million years. Long before modern humans, Homo sapiens, even existed as a species. Some researchers push the timeline even further back. Harvard anthropologist Richard Wrangham believes fire control may stretch as far as 1.8 to 1.9 million years into the past, and his evidence isn't ash or charcoal or burnt bone. It's something far more subtle written into our own bodies. He points to skeletal changes in early Homo erectus fossils, a noticeably shorter digestive tract, a smaller stomach cavity, and a significantly larger brain compared to earlier ancestors. Smaller gut, bigger brain, the fingerprint of cooking. Wrangham's argument is this: raw food takes enormous energy to digest. Cooked food doesn't. If early humans were already cooking their meals over fire, they would have absorbed far more calories from the same amount of food, freeing up energy that the body could redirect toward growing a bigger, more demanding brain. It's a controversial theory. Not every archaeologist agrees the evidence is solid enough. But let's stick with what we know for certain, because even the conservative estimate is staggering. By 400,000 years ago, the evidence becomes completely undeniable. Archaeologists have excavated actual hearths, organized fire pits containing layered ash, charcoal, and burnt animal bones preserved inside caves across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. These weren't accidental, one-time fires caused by lightning strikes. They were maintained, managed, reused in the exact same spot over and over. For warmth, for cooking meat, for light in the darkness of a cave, and for keeping predators at a safe distance during the night. So fire in some controlled, repeated form was already deeply woven into human life for hundreds of thousands of years before our ancestors ever lost their body fur completely, which raises an even bigger, stranger question. If early humans already had fire that far back in time, why on earth did it take so long to invent clothes? Here's where the story gets genuinely strange, and where the science gets surprisingly clever. Cloth doesn't fossilize. Animal hide, plant fiber, woven material, all of it rots and decomposes within a few thousand years at most, which means scientists couldn't simply dig up the world's first shirt and run a carbon dating test on it. So how did researchers figure out, with any real precision, when clothing actually began? The answer involves something almost nobody expects: lice. There are two genetically distinct species of human lice: head lice, which live exclusively in scalp hair, and body lice, a completely separate species that can only survive inside the fibers of clothing. Not on bare skin, not in head hair, only in fabric, pressed close against the body. This single biological fact means something important. Body lice could not have existed before clothing existed. There was simply nowhere for them to live. So a team of researchers at the University of Florida, led by biologist David Reed, compared the DNA of both louse species. They calculated exactly when the two species genetically diverged from a single common ancestor and used that genetic split as a kind of biological clock. Lice don't lie. Their DNA marks the birth of clothing. Their conclusion: clothing lice emerged somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Let that number really sink in. For roughly 800,000 years after losing their body hair. Completely exposed to sun, wind, and cold nights, early humans survived in Africa, using nothing but fire, shade, water, and behavioral adaptation. No daily clothing, no fur, just raw. Biological adaptation and intelligence. Clothes were not humanity's first solution to the cold. They were the upgrade that arrived much, much later, and when they finally did arrive, they changed the entire trajectory of our species. So why does the order actually matter? Why should anyone care whether fire or clothing came first? Because it explains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in human history. How did our hairless, fire-dependent ancestors ever manage to leave the warmth of Africa at all? For most of human evolutionary history, our ancestors lived almost exclusively in warm, equatorial climates where fire was useful for cooking meat, for light at night, for protection from predators, but not strictly necessary just to survive the ambient temperature. Clothing changed that equation completely and permanently. Once humans developed real, reliable, durable clothing, animal hides carefully scraped clean with sharp stone tools, fastened skins wrapped and tied around the body, and eventually true garments sewn together using bone needles, they suddenly possessed something that fire alone could never provide: portable warmth. Fire stays in one place. Clothes go with you. Think about the limitation of fire for a moment. Fire requires fuel. It requires shelter from wind and rain. It requires a fixed location you have to return to every single night. You cannot carry a hearth across a frozen tundra while hunting reindeer, but a properly sewn hide coat, you simply wear it. You walk, you hunt, you migrate hundreds, even thousands of miles, carrying your only source of warmth on your own body. Researchers studying this exact timeline noticed something remarkable: the rise of tailored, sewn clothing, marked specifically by the appearance of eyed bone needles in the archaeological record, around 40,000 to 50,000 years ago, lines up almost perfectly with the first major waves of human migration deep into the cold latitudes of Ice Age Europe and Asia. Fire kept early humans alive in one place for nearly 1 million years. Clothing is what finally let them leave that place behind and conquer every remaining corner of the planet. Now, here's something worth pausing on, completely something that connects every piece of science we just covered back to a text written thousands of years ago. Genesis describes this exact sequence without microscopes, without LICE DNA sequencing, without carbon dating equipment, just an ancient text written long before any of this science existed. First, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, Adam and Eve sew fig leaves together to cover themselves. A quick, temporary, makeshift solution, exactly the kind of improvised covering that leaves no trace in the archaeological record. Then, just one verse later, in Genesis 3:21, the text says something very specific. God made garments of skin and clothed them, animal hide, something far more durable, far more practical for survival outside the garden, in a harsher world. Genesis 3:7 leaves, sewn together. Genesis 3:21 animal skin, in that exact order. Leaves first, animal skin second. That is the exact same two-stage progression that archaeologists pieced together independently using stone tools, lice genetics, and bone needles spanning thousands of years of research. Is this a coincidence? It's entirely possible. But it remains a remarkably specific detail for an ancient text to get right, describing not just the existence of clothing, but the correct sequence of materials, the correct order of temporary to durable, without ever knowing what modern science would someday uncover through a microscope. So let's go back to where we started. Which came first, fire or clothes? The honest, scientifically accurate answer is this: fire came first, by hundreds of thousands of years. There's no getting around that. But clothing is what changed absolutely everything. It's what let a hairless, fire-dependent primate finally walk out of Africa into the freezing plains of Ice Age Europe, across the towering mountains of Asia, into every remaining corner of a planet that should have been biologically impossible for a naked ape to survive in. Fire kept us alive in one place for nearly 1 million years. Clothing made us unstoppable, capable of going anywhere on Earth, and somehow thousands of years before anyone could sequence LICE DNA in a laboratory or carbon date the ash inside a hearth, the book of Genesis described the exact same story, in the exact same order. Leaves first, then skins. It's not mythology, it's memory. If you've made it this far, here's something to think about. Every single piece of evidence in this video, the LICE DNA, the hearth ash, the bone needles, was discovered using tools that didn't exist 100 years ago, which makes you wonder what else ancient texts got right, long before we had any way to check. Next week, we're asking an even bigger question. Why did ancient humans build entire cities thousands of years before historians thought organized civilization was even possible? If you want to keep uncovering exactly where science and Genesis agree, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.